Hello, and welcome to the Scriptures Are Real podcast, the podcast where we talk about things that make the Scriptures real to us so that they come alive to us and so that we get more power out of them. I'm your host, Kerry, and this is one of the shortcasts that we do to help us just get a couple little elements that might make the Scriptures more real. And today we're talking about a number of elements in the life of Abraham. I think I'll do a shortcast on the geography and some historical details, and then I'll do another one about some Egyptological details that will help the story as it's presented in Abraham chapter 1 come alive. So we're going to talk for just a moment about some things in the story that have really made this come to life for me and have really made it feel to me like this is a real person that I can identify with. Because again, anything that makes them seem more like a real person allows me to identify with them. At least that's how it works for me. So it's interesting to me that if we get just a number of historical details in this the text that I think just make a whole lot of things come to life for us. So I'll just give you one example. We've had questions about where is Ur of the Chaldees. Some people, most people think that it's in Iraq, southern Iraq, but some people think that it is in the kind of northern Syria, southern Turkey kind of area. There even a recent publication by a great scholar that I know and admire named Gary Rensburg. He argues for that just on biblical knowledge. With some extra knowledge from the book of Abraham, I'm fairly convinced that that's what happened. Some of that has to do with the Egyptian influence that we see both in the story and places where we know that Egyptian influence was. But there's some other interesting little things. So here's just a fun one. And again, this is all in trying to understand the text and the story better. So if we go to Abraham chapter 1, verse 10, we see where he talks about the priest of Pharaoh who offers a thank offering of a child. Upon the altar which stood by the hill called Potiphar's Hill at the head of the plain of Olishem. Now that's interesting because Olishem is a name that we don't find anywhere else in the scriptures, but not that long ago, some people found, we've noticed in a couple of texts. So one of them is from just before Abraham's time, and one of them is from during Abraham's lifetime. They use the word ulisum. And those are shifts that we often see. The O and U shift we see in a number of places in languages, and the S to Sh shift we see in a number of places, even within Hebrew. In different dialects of Hebrew we see it, but we see it also as we go between different Semitic languages. So Olishem and Ulisum are almost certainly the same place. And you can tell from these texts that it is somewhere in northern Syria or southern Turkey. Just right in that border area. It's right where we would kind of expect it to be from the text. And I find that to be kind of fun. So I think we can actually do a fairly decent job of tracing the story as it happens, where he comes down from northern Syria and so on, and would have come along into Haran, which would be in Syria, and then come down into modern day Jordan. And in the book of Abraham, it talks about him stopping at a place called Jershon. I think that's a fairly decent chance. Don't really know for sure, but a fairly decent chance that this is modern day Jerash in Jordan, right as you get to the Jabbok River, just before the Jabbok River. And then you would come there and follow along the Jabbok River. That's your easiest way to get down from Jordan and go across the plains, the Jordan Valley Rift. And back up into modern day Canaan, ancient Canaan. And you would then get to Shechem or Sikhem. It's spelled different ways, but that's the same place. And then at that point, you're in the high hills of the Canaan. And that's where Abraham kind of lives his life, is going back and forth on what's known as the highway of the patriarchs, or the way of the patriarchs, but there were the ridge road. It's the road that goes along the top of the ridges of the mountains rather than down in the canyons or in the plains. And so we can really situate Abraham's life fairly well. I've done recently an article, just came out in a great book called From Creation to Sinai. That's a compilation of articles by different scholars looking at in detail at different aspects of the story, the way it's presented from creation to Mount Sinai. So basically up until the Exodus. And I looked at what do we know about Egyptian influence in this area. One of the several things I looked at in an article was what do we know about Egyptian influence in this area and how would that have affected the patriarchs? And I've become convinced that the patriarchs and matriarchs, Sarah and Abraham, Rebecca and Isaac and Jacob and Leah and Rachel and so on, that they knew that, so that the Egyptians were very strategic as to what places they tried to control. They didn't try and control everything in the land of Canaan. They controlled places that were strategic in terms of military routes and trade routes. And you'll find that the matriarchs and patriarchs are very nomadic. And I think that they're trying to avoid both a lot of interaction with the Canaanites. I mean, they have to have some interaction because they are going to need to trade. We know Abraham is like behind a cave so that he can have a place to bury his wife and so on. And they have competition sometimes over wells, these finite resources and so on. But at the same time, they often are just trying to avoid these established people that have larger groups than they are and have fortified cities. They're going to try and avoid the Egyptians as they come in and sometimes on military raids. Sometimes just on their normal routes going back and forth between their strongholds. And my guess would be that the matriarchs and patriarchs and their families kind of do a little dance between getting enough contact that they can sell their sheep and buy things they need, and at the same time trying to avoid military raids and the religious influence of the Canaanites and the Egyptians and so on. So there are a lot of interesting things to consider that I hope makes the story become real to you. Here's another fun little thing. I have a friend named George Pierce. He's a professor at BYU who did what's called oxygen isotope analysis. I know you're excited about that. But anyway, for the land of Canaan during these time periods to see what was happening with in terms of moisture. And it's really interesting. What we find is that just kind of at the beginning maybe of Abraham's time in Canaan, that there was a really, really dry period. A huge drought, much drier than normal. Well, that's interesting because we find that as Abraham first comes into Canaan, and according to the biblical and the Pearl of Great Price text, we get even more in the book of Abraham on this, that there's a famine. And because of the famine, he has to go down into Egypt. And so the science of what's going on in the area matches with the story. Interestingly, that is soon after followed by one of the wetter periods that they've had. So that for much of Abraham's life and really all of Isaac's and Jacob's life, so this semi-arid area was much less arid than we're accustomed to seeing. And the areas where they could have lived or where they did live would have been a little bit easier to live in than what we often think of and what we see today. And I find that interesting. Now, that we can only do so much in terms of geography and history and archaeology on these little podcasts. I'll try and do a little bit because I do think it makes it become more real. But I also want you to know that I have a YouTube channel. My YouTube channel is also called The Scriptures Are Real. Some of you are watching this on YouTube, and it's also called The Scriptures Are Real. But there are two different playlists on the YouTube channel. One of them is these podcasts. It's called The Scriptures Are Real, but there's also a playlist. So there's the Scriptures Are Real channel, which has the Scriptures Are Real playlist. It also has an Old Testament class videos playlist. And that's where I took some videos that I made for my Old Testament classes. I just had, I got frustrated that we were not having enough time to have deep discussions like I would like to have and interaction with the students. And so I started thinking, what are the things that we don't need to have discussions that I can just give them information? And it was history, geography, and archaeology. So I started creating little videos that I wanted my classes to watch before they came to class. Now, I did this long enough ago. I started doing this in, I think, 2011, if I remember right, that the technology that BYU was able to supply me with at the time would only allow me to do little 5-minute videos. So I created 5-minute videos, and when the subject matter needed more than that, then I'd do several videos. So for example, I had Abraham 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, 1.4. So that was a 20-minute video. In the end, we didn't know that was inspired because lots of research has shown that younger generation has about a 5-minute attention span for these kinds of things. So they can watch 5 minutes and then as they stop one video and start another, that resets them and they can watch another 5 minutes. So it was inspired in the end, but it's bad technology. I didn't know what I was doing. I still don't know what I was doing, but I know more now than I did then, but still lots of information in there. So if you want to get more in terms of geography, history, archaeology, where I show pictures of the places, I show maps, I show archaeological sketches, all sorts of things, then go to my YouTube channel, The Scriptures Are Real, and look for the Old Testament class video playlist. And for most weeks, you'll find that I have some things there. So I have about 20 minutes worth on Abraham, probably about 10 minutes on Isaac, about 20 minutes on Jacob, and then we'll do Joshua and Judges and Moses and all the way up through David. And then I've got the rest. I have videos made for the rest. I don't have them posted yet, but I will before we get further along, so that from here on out, there wasn't really any of these videos because the history and geography and archaeology are a little bit tougher pre-Abraham. But by the time we get to Abraham, we can really start to nail these things down. So by this point, then you have lots of those videos. And from here on out for the rest of the Old Testament year, when we get into the prophets, sometimes there aren't as many videos, although I am going to put up my videos from my Isaiah class that will help people understand Isaiah. So that will also get put on that playlist. But there will be for pretty much every Come Follow Me week. And sometimes, like the Jacob one may cover 2 weeks worth, or the Joseph one may cover 2 weeks worth, but pretty much for every Come Follow Me week, if you want more on the history and geography, and including, I cover some of the history of things that we don't read or that we don't spend a lot of time on, but because I want people to just be able to have that history, you can get just quick continuity gained through a short overview of the history. A good place to go will be to my YouTube channel, The Scriptures Are Real, and then look at the playlist for Old Testament class videos. I should also mention that I have a website called outofthedust.org, where you can find all of those listed in order and links to them and other resources on a page. So I've got all sorts of pages on outofthedust.org. So again, it's all one word, outofthedust.org. And I've got one that is called a page for the Abrahamic covenant, so you can understand the Abrahamic covenant better. That's a really important one for this week. If you want to understand the Abrahamic covenant better, I've got there I've got handouts, tons of links to different firesides and podcasts and things like that. So if you really want to dive deep into the Abrahamic covenant, besides my book called God Will Prevail, you can get a brochure on it that I created. You can get links to videos and firesides and all sorts of stuff. There's one on the book of Abraham. There's a page on Isaiah. There's a page that's called Old Testament Aids. And if you get on there, you can find charts and articles and lectures and videos and links to all of these videos that I'm talking about. So hopefully we're creating for you a lot of resources that will help you have a great experience understanding the Old Testament this year. So I hope that not only is this helpful, but I know that as I think about these little details in Abraham's life, he becomes more real to me, and I can situate him and look at what it looked like and trace his life and understand my own life better. I think in particular, the podcast with Phil Allred, we go through some of those journeys as well, and that does the same thing, although I think the interview this week with Stefan Tager and with Rebecca Call also, and they all three bring out great details that help the scriptures become more real to us. So I hope that this is helpful for you all, and have a wonderful week. I'll post another one about some Book of Abraham Egyptological elements a little bit later. Thank you.